Alrighty, so we're going to be back in Judges again today. Finish this up, leaving off with Gideon's 40 years of peace. We're going to start with Abimelech. And if you're reading in an NASB study Bible, they've got a subtitle there added. It says Abimelech's conspiracy. There's a study note in my scriptures that I found interesting. It says the stories of Gideon and Abimelech form the literary center of Judges. And it says Abimelech, who tried to set himself up like a Canaanite city king with the help of Baal, stands in sharp contrast to his father Gideon, who was also Jerubbaal, who had attacked Baal worship and insisted that Yahweh rule over Israel. Abimelech attempted the Canaanite revival in the very place where Joshua had earlier reaffirmed Israel's allegiance to Yahweh. In every respect, Abimelech was the antithesis of Yahweh's appointed judges. So I found that interesting. I don't know if you, when you started studying the chapter, if you went into in the study Bible in the front of it, but this is a very structured book within scriptures when you're looking at literary wise. And that's forming the central point here. But we have, and I'm just going to go over the history. That's all we've been doing is, and if you've got questions or comments, feel free to stop me and interject. So Abimelech, he goes to Shechem, and he convinces the people there that it was better for them to make him their king than to live under the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, which is Gideon. And we have to remember that Abimelech is a son of Gideon, but he's a half-brother to the others because he's from a illegitimate relationship with a Canaanite woman. So Abimelech's half Canaanite. And he kills his brothers after the people of Shechem agree to make him their king. He goes and he kills his brothers, all but one. The youngest, Jotham, or Jotham, close enough. He survives, and then he goes up on a hill and he screams out over Abimelech and he prophesies over them and the men of Shechem. Basically, he calls on Yahweh to judge between them. And we're told that 3 years later, Abimelech gets in a fight with the people of Shechem. And eventually he's mortally wounded by a woman who drops a millstone on his head. So that he won't be thought of as, being killed by a woman, he goes ahead and tells his aide to go ahead and run him through with the sword. So his aide kills him. That way it looks like he's killed by a man's hand. We've covered that before because we were talking about how whoever that woman was that dropped that millstone on his head, the upper millstone, had to be a hefty lady. That's a stone there, Jack. So then we're told that Israel again does evil in the sight of Yahweh. Yahweh sells them into the hands of the Philistines. So Israel cries out to Yahweh, and in the scriptures it says Yahweh said, "Nah, go ask those gods that you wanted to worship instead of me for help. See how that helps." And Israel actually starts to purge itself of all its false gods, and it repents. And then eventually Jephthah or Yephthan, I can't pronounce these names. That's Caitlin's job. She's good at this. He's an illegitimate son of Gilead, but he's a warrior. And he is driven out by his brothers. And I'm noticing there are recurring themes here. Go all the way back to Genesis. The brothers keep driving out brothers and then turn around and have to go back to the brother they drove out to save them. This theme seems to repeat in Scripture a lot. So they go back to Yiftan and they say, hey, we need some help here. So they get him to help and fight Ammon for them. And we're told that the Spirit comes upon Jethan. Mm-hmm. And he then turns around and he makes a tragic vow to Yahweh. He says, if you give it into my hand and I succeed with this, then the first thing that comes out of my tent, I'll sacrifice to you. And his only child comes out, a daughter. She's the first thing that comes out. So there's a big deal around there because that would be a human sacrifice, a blood sacrifice of a person. That would seem to be against Scripture. The rabbis argue that what happened there is that he didn't kill her and make her a burnt offering. He sent her up to a mountain where she had to live in a monastery. And he gave her up that way, where she'd never have children. But that doesn't seem to be the way the scripture reads. The scripture says he did to her what he had vowed. So I don't know what's going on there, because that would seem to have violated Torah and the laws of Moses. I'm just aware that there's a big to-do about that. And then before whatever happens to her, what her fate was, she's given permission to spend 2 months up on a mountain mourning her virginity. Essentially there is mourning that she's never going to have children. And we're told that becomes a tradition of Israelite women from that point forward to go up and remember her and her sacrifice and her lost virginity, her ruined virginity, where she'll never have children. But the note in my Bible says it was probably just a regional thing, because it's never mentioned again in Scripture. So Ephraim hears about all of this, the battle with Ammon, and it's offended again, because it was offended when Gideon went and fought and didn't call them to help. Ephraim's offended this time, and they come to do war this time. Yathan can't appease them, so he defeats them. And here's where we have the shibboleth. Say Sibboleth, shibboleth, 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 shibboleth. Well, if you say you die, if you say you live. So that's got a little something going on there for our Masorite brothers who tell us this is the only way to pronounce Hebrew, isn't it? Yeah, Scripture tends to say might be more than one way. So that's where that one comes from. We know the story, but it's one of the reasons I think he's had me reading the history books in the Scriptures. I know the stories, but I've never really figured out where they come from. Which I wouldn't have known what book to go look in. I'd had to look it up on the computer or something. The Sibboleth, to find out where the story was. I think that we should, as believers, have a little bit more grasp of the history and the chronology and everything. Because as we go through the book of Judges, there's a refrain in here that I'll save until the last part of our study today. And when we get to the refrain, I got a note for you. But and it's nowhere in my Bible. It just struck me. But when we know the history, we're going to see patterns that can help teach us if we're paying attention. So Ephraim, there's 40-something thousand people end up dying at the hands of Jathan there. And we're told he judges Israel for 6 years, and then he dies. And then we're told of a succession of some judges, several judges. It's just a real short passage, this person, this person, this person. But we see the 70 show up again there in that little succession, 40 sons and 30 grandsons or whatever, 70 men who ride on donkeys. And then we're told Israel again does evil. So the Philistines oppress Israel yet again. And we're introduced to a barren woman who is promised a son by the angel of Yahweh. This is another repeating theme. The barren woman being promised a son who's going to be special. So the angel of Yahweh tells her that her son is going to be a Nazarite. That's why Samson has long hair. Y'all realize that if you've taken a Nazarite vow, you're not allowed to cut your hair until you end the vow. Well, she's being told that Samson's going to be a lifelong Nazarite. So his hair is going to be long, which, unless you're a Nazarite, that's against the law of Moses. So this is also why no fruit of the vine, no fruit, no wine, no nothing that comes from the vine. That's part of the Nazarite vow. So she's told not to eat or drink. So she encounters this angel with Yahweh, and her husband, Manoah, he goes out and they have a conversation with the angel. And he says toward the end of that passage in the Scripture, he says to his wife, I said, we're both going to die now because we've met Elohim face to face. Yahweh face to face. So this is part of the two Yahwehs in heaven. You'll see this repeats over and over again throughout your Scriptures if you're paying attention. An angel does not seem to be the same thing. Just a melech seems to be different from the single character of the melech of Yahweh. The angel of Yahweh seems to be a unique individual who somehow or another seems to be Yahweh in a human form. And in ancient times, the rabbis knew about this. They called this the two powers or two Yahwehs in heaven. And they didn't have a problem with that until the Messiah showed up and claimed to be the son of Yahweh. Then all of a sudden they had a problem with the idea of two Yahwehs. What it was man-made and political strife there. They wanted to keep their comfort and their power and their leadership in Israel. And they knew that if Yeshua was who he claimed to be, they were going to lose all that. So Samson's born, and we're told that the Spirit of Yahweh comes upon him in a mighty way. He starts slaying Philistines. From what I understand, okay, Samson's a Danite. And from what I understand, Samson was not, we think of Samson looking like a Hulk Hogan or something. Samson was apparently a rather small man. The point being that when he rips that gate off the city, he's too small to be thought to be that strong. It's meant to show you that his power does not come from himself, from his physique. At least that's the way I would interpret it. We also have to be aware of the fact that it is very likely that the character of Hercules, connected to the Argonauts, may well be traced back to the story of Samson. Because the Argonauts were Danites, and the Greeks knew that. And Samson's a Danite. So there may be a connection there. Samson's got this little common trait with a lot of other rather well-known Israelites. He falls for a Canaanite woman, takes her for his wife. She's later given to one of his friends by her father. He takes her and gives her to one of Samson's friends because he figured Samson had done away with her. When Samson goes back to get her, he gets a little cranky about that because she'd been given away on him, so he grabs a bunch of foxes and lights the fields on fire. And the men of Judah come to him and said, "What are you doing? Don't you realize that the Philistines are over us? You're going to cause us some trouble here." So they bind him. And Samson ends up getting free, and this is where he slays the 1,000 men with the jawbone. And Yahweh, in the end of that, when that story's over, Yahweh splits a rock again so he can drink. Water comes out from the rock. Reoccurring themes. I'm beginning to think that there's something about striking a rock and getting water that we might be missing, because that reference is going to show up again all the way through to the book of Hebrews. So I don't know if it's just supposed to point us back to the act in the Exodus, or if there might be something else culturally going on there. So we're told that Samson judges Israel for 20 years, and then he gets himself entangled with a harlot, Delilah. So, and there's another thing. Whenever Yahweh's leaders get themselves entangled with harlots or women pretending to be harlots, things get a little sideways. When Judah ended up with his daughter-in-law, what was she pretending to be? A harlot. So, and we see several of these occasions. King David, when he gets messed up with Bathsheba. Bathsheba's not innocent in that story. She's up on the rooftop at the right time in the right spot for the king to see her bathing. She's married. She's playing the role of a harlot there. So Yahweh's people get tangled up in this a lot. So Delilah, she ends up extracting his secret from him. And she ends up getting his hair cut off. He loses his strength. He's captured. He's put in the building and everything, tortured, taunted, whatever. And we're told that the building they're in must have been pretty good size, because we're told there are 3,000 people on the roof looking down to see what's going on. And this is probably not the way we think of it. You might think there's a hole in the roof. I have done some studying on this, and what I've found is a lot of times what happens is you start with one small little 1 or 2 room house. And as that patriarch has children, they add houses onto it. And they'll end up building it in the shape of like a C, where you have your gate going in and out, and it forms a compound. So he might have been in the center of this building. It doesn't have to be a real big center area. It could be not a whole lot bigger than this room, or 3 or 4 times the size of the room. But he was probably in the center of that in a courtyard, and they're all up on the roofs looking down in on them. But either way, if you've got pillars holding this place up, when he pulls them in, the whole building came down. So we're led to believe he killed well over 1,000 people, as well as himself, as his last act of defiance. And I'd always wondered about Samson, but if he got his strength back, probably means he made himself right with Yahweh again too, right in the end. Because his strength never came from him. It was from Yahweh's blessing. Yahweh's the one who gave him his strength. So if he got it back, I'm thinking he found favor again with Yahweh again. And then we're told a little story about Micah and how he makes an idol out of some silver that had been taken from his mother. She had lost it. He has it. She had cursed it. He brings it back to her. He ends up making an idol and engrave an image and an ephah and some, religious tools out of the silver. And he grabs a Levite and he turns the Levite into his own personal little priest. So we've got idolatrous worship going on here with Micah. And then these Danites start seeking. They're seeking a place to live. Lebensraum, or they're looking for living room, living space. Yeah, and I immediately thought of another little guy with a bad haircut and a screwed up mustache, because that's what he was looking for. So they come along and they inquire of Micah's priest. Ask the priest, inquire of Yahweh for us. And they end up taking the priest, saying, it's better for you to serve the whole clan here rather than just one man. There was 5 spies. There's that word 5 again. I am convinced that part of what's going on here in this one is this is not necessarily Baal worship. If you understand how the northern kingdom gets itself in trouble, it's idolatry and apostasy. But it's a very, in a lot of cases, it's a very perverted way of worshiping Yahweh. Because remember that they ended up putting up 2 bulls and pretending that this was Yahweh. Just the same thing Aaron did. And one of them is erected in the city of Dan. Well, the 5 spies, what's the 5 going to immediately remind you of The virgins? The 5's got a bigger meaning in Scripture. Torah. Especially the 5 books of Moses. So it's going to remind you of Torah. So it's kind of like hey, you guys are setting up an apostate, idolatrous worship of either a false god or Yahweh, and it's 5 people that are primarily 5 spies primarily driving this. It's kind of like the 5 should have reminded them something. You're doing this wrong. But they end up setting it up, and then they take this Levite who should know better than to do this, but he's an apostate priest, and they set him up. He becomes priest of their clan. And then 600 warriors of Dan, they take this city named Laish. This is in the northern kingdom. This is up by the foot of Mount Hermon. And they rename it Dan. So that's the city of Dan, which used to be Laish. The Scripture tells us this. And that's where they set up their idol. So when the northern kingdom splits, they set one of the bulls up. One in, I think it's Shiloh, is it? And then one in Dan. So this is a precursor to where their temple substitute's going to be set up. And then we have the story of the concubine, the Levite's concubine, who gets raped and murdered, and he cuts her up. We went over this just a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Benjamin, and this almost results in the elimination of the tribe of Benjamin. But the rest of Israel has pity on them, and they go to the one city that didn't help in the Civil War, and I think, if I remember right, I skipped that section. We just covered it. If I remember right, they kill everybody and they take, 200 or 300 virgins that were left, and they give them to the Dan for wives, and they still need some. So then they tell Israel, whatever women go down here for this party to this field to dance, whatever, Danites can take wives from them, and all the surviving Danites, not Danites, Benjamites, which is 600, if I'm remembering right. So there's that 600 number plays twice, 600 with the Danites, 600 with the Benjamites. I don't know if that's the actual numbers. I don't know if whoever wrote the book of Judges is looking for symmetry here. I'm starting to suspect that every now and then the people who wrote the scriptures did that, either rounded numbers off or intentionally put numbers in there that might or might not be accurate in order to give a message. Because you got to remember, for the people writing the scriptures, what's more important to them is the spiritual theme and message than the actual event. most of the time.
I had a question on the early part of that story.
Mhm.
Is when they were going after Benjamin, they got together and said, we will go. But the first thing they did, they actually went and asked Yahweh.
Yes, they did.
Said yes. But the interesting part is for the first two times they asked and he said yes, they went and they lost. And it took them 3 times of being obedient to the direction of Yahweh before they actually won. And I think that's more a message to us is we don't give up just because things don't look the way they're supposed to. We think they should when we're following Yahweh's will.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be a quick study. There's one other thing. Then we're told that the book ends with the line, in those days, there was no king, and everybody did what they thought was right. And it struck me for the very first time. First of all, they had a king. They had a king. He was in heaven. They had a law. They weren't following it. They had chosen to reject it. And then I got to realizing we should be paying attention to this. Everyone did what they thought was right, even though they knew they had a spiritual king. They had the law of Moses, so they had the law. They knew who the lawgiver was in this case. Ultimately, it wasn't Moses, it was Yahweh. He wrote the law with his own finger. And if they still had the Ark of the Covenant, they had this with them. They had everything they needed. They just rejected it. They chose to do it their way. Sound familiar? How many of us came out of a visible church that was doing the exact same thing? And we claim we're worshiping the Father, and learning and following the Son, but we have a habit of doing it our way. And a lot of times we'll mix either worldly practices or worse, the practices of other religions in with our worship of Yahweh. And that's syncretism, which is a lot of that's what the Northern Kingdom does when they split from the Southern Kingdom. That's what Aaron was doing when they made a graven image. It said, behold, Israel, Yahweh, your Elohim that brought you up out of Egypt. So they weren't declaring the graven image, the golden calf they made. They weren't declaring that calf to be Baal or anything. Aaron said it was Yahweh. But they were going to do it their way, just like the Northern Kingdom does, just like the Danites have a habit of doing. And when you look at this passage in Judges, I always thought this was just, whoever wrote Judges was just telling me, and everybody just did things their own way. I never realized, I think that's an accusation and a curse at the same time. They're accusing, whoever the author was, is accusing Israel. You had a king, you had law, you chose to ignore him and do it your own way. And what happened every time Israel did it their own way? Didn't work out, did it? How many people remember the prophecy about Ephraim? And it says Ephraim will be without king for many generations. Have we had a king around here in this country? Never have in this country, ever. Not since the revolution. And in a lot of cases, the frontier wasn't under charter with King George, so that area was not under kingship. And we had a law. We first of all had scripture, but then we had our constitution, and we keep doing it our own way, and it never works out for us. I think there's a message there for us to pay attention to. If we're not going to do it his way, it ain't going to work. It's not going to work out. And yet, stiff-necked people that we are, we keep trying to do it our own way. So that concludes the notes I had for Judges. Not a long day, but we're not done. We're not over with. We can find something else to fill ourselves. And I am going to go into the book of Ruth next unless something comes up. Because, unless he gives me something else to teach, or you guys ask for us to teach something different, I'm just going to keep on this for a while because I feel myself that I'm missing something. This is my weakest part of Scripture here. My weakest command of Yahweh's word is in these books, from Joshua through to when the what they call the writings start, the Proverbs and Psalms. So I need to study this because there's a lot still left in here that. Well, how many times does Yeshua end up quoting from the history books in Scripture? So you not remember the story when David's men ate the showbread? And he's always quoting and referencing things that happened. Yeah, he says it is written a lot. So I'm going to stick with it. We'll do Ruth next week. But is there anything anybody else? Well, heck, Ruth will be easy to knock out. We might even roll right into Samuel. First Samuel.
It's my understanding, you've been for a while, and I'm reminded by what you're just talking about now, just walking in on it. Sorry I'm late. But
No, you're all right.
Anyway, Messiah, Yeshua, is described as a king, and of course he hasn't been coronated, or whatever that hasn't been passed yet, but will be. But for us, he already is because the kingdom's already in us. But that being said, him being the king is basically a amped up governor. Governs. So he governs the Torah. He governs the Spirit. He governs the truth. He governs everything that goes into us through the Spirit, that he sent and comforted. So where was I going with that? I just went right.
It's your thought, brother. I had no idea where you were going. Well,
yeah, this is what Father said in Ezekiel, that he would be the one to put his Spirit in us and give us a new heart, and that he would,
it's also in Jeremiah.
Yeah, in Jeremiah. I mean, and so he's expressing that he's governing in us. He is the governor of our heart, the king of our heart. So we are ruled by a king as a body and as an assembly and as other assemblies should be. We're all governed as what I suppose we're grafted into the wild olive tree.
Yeah.
The wild olive tree, Israel, because Israel's been
House of Israel. Yeah.
House of Israel. To be remarried, to be rejoined, but he's governing us as a bride because he hasn't yet taken us as a wife. We're not a full on.
No, we haven't had the consummation of the wedding supper yet.
But we're a bride.
But we're married again now in the same sense that Mary was before when she conceived Yeshua. She was married to Joseph, but they hadn't had the wedding supper yet. Yeah. In the Hebrew wedding, you can be married to your bridegroom for up to 18 months before he comes and takes you to the weddings.
Yeah, so that being said, we have to look for that governing within ourselves and go to him for that governing.
That's part of why the world hates a believer. A true believer is a self-governing individual who doesn't look to or bow to man's government.
Yeah, like Daniel and Azariah.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people, when you talk to them about the history of this country, they'll tell you this country was never meant to be a theocracy or anything like that. You might want to take that up with Samuel Adams, because when they signed the Declaration, and you'll find his quote, but they leave out a very important part of his quote. When you find it, they've left this part out. It says, "Today we have restored the sovereign to his rightful place." And they'll quote that section. And then they'll quote the last half, "May he reign on high forever." The middle part they miss is he says, "And we start the great experiment of Protestant theocracy." He's telling you the nation was founded to be the king, to be Yahweh in heaven, and we were to be a commonwealth under his rule. Yeah. He was not the only founding father that held that ideal.
So he held to it being a theocracy.
Yes, but not like where the priests ran things. You have to remember Madison himself, when they wrote the Constitution, he found the three divisions of government in Isaiah, where Yahweh says, "I will be your king, your lawgiver, and your judge." So you had an executive, you had a judiciary, and you had a legislative. So that's where James Madison found that too. Funny that the man who's supposed to be secular and doesn't believe in mixing religion and government went and found the three divisions of our government in his Bible. we've been strayed from how the country was set up. But the founding fathers, if you read their writing, not what our historians tell us, they were looking, the number one thing they quoted was the scriptures. And they were looking to the scriptures for how to set up a commonwealth with Yahweh as king. And that's what they tried to do.
13 colonies are now, as a whole, as it is today, as an apostate, an errant and defiant nation, just like Israel became.
Yep.
When it fell under.
And we're going to reap the same wrath.
Yeah.
So, because you got to remember that up until World War II was over, we were only 48 states. Does 48 ring with anybody in the scriptures? How many cities did the Levites have? 48. And Israel was supposed to be a nation of priests, right? So we were a nation of 48 cities. Do you not see the parallelism? We were a nation, literally a nation of priests. But we were a nation of 48 nations. What's that? That's a federation. It's a commonwealth. We were a company of what? Company of nations. The parallels, the picture is just, it jumps out of scripture and screams at us that we are the seat of Ephraim in the modern world. But the fact that Americans are finally starting to realize that, not just Americans, but believers that have dug into the scriptures around the world are realizing this. That's prophecy too. That's Ephraim, you'll be for many years be in a land to say you are where you thought you were not the sons of the living Elohim. And people will start telling you, yes, you are the sons of the living Elohim. And they'll stand up, remember who they are. And then what's the first thing they do? They grab hold of him who is a Jew. It says, teach us the Torah, because we know that Elohim is with you. And Ephraim will make Judah jealous. Well, how do you make an Orthodox Jew jealous? You see Torah better than they do. Yeah. Yes. That's the only way you're going to make a Jew jealous, an Orthodox Judah jealous. So these are all scriptures and written, in some cases, 2,800 years ago now.
Yeah, I recall the time when I first started getting inklings of following the Torah, and things started registering. And it was before I was really practicing, really walking in it. And before I found the congregation here, that was years ago. But I was searching, I was trying, and I went to the 7-Day Adventist, and I got creeped out, because of the big Jesus murals on the wall and the whole Scandinavian blue-eyed Jesus. Just all that just kind of steered me away. But so I found this Reformed congregation up here on Frankfurt Avenue. Right? I went there, and I finally saw them out there parked in the parking lot. And I went in, and they were welcoming and everything. And they're having their oneg, their dinner. And I didn't really say anything, but I was speaking about the Moedim and speaking about the feast and Shabbat, and I was using all the proper and right terms and things. And this one lady just finally broke down and says, "How do you know about all this? If you're goyim, if you're how do you know about it?" I said, because of your Messiah. I said, if it wasn't for Yeshua HaMashiach, I said, I would not know about any of this. Of course, that's when the what is it, rabbi? Mm-hmm. Rabbi didn't look very happy at all when I said that. But I said, yeah, because of Yeshua. I said, this is why I understand these things. I said, this is the only way I would understand, and the only way that I would care or be here with you guys. I said, that's why I'm here. I'm searching. So, and I was like, I'm going to a Jew, and I'm taking your sleeve. So
that's exactly what you were doing, following prophecy. You mentioned something that the blue-eyed Jesus. He was not blonde-haired, blue-eyed. But do not dismiss the possibility of red-haired, blue-eyed.
Yeah,
because there are strong connections between the house of David and red hair. And a lot of people with red hair tend to have blue or green eyes. Y'all do realize that the ancient people of Afghanistan are Hebraite stock, right? That's Scythians. That's where they settled. Have you ever seen pictures of true Afghanis?
Yeah, they got
Greenest and bluest. They got a dark complexion. They have the greenest and bluest eyes you were ever going to see.
Stark blue eyes.
Yes, blue and green, bright like crayons.
It's glowing almost.
Yes. Be careful when we deal with genetic things. People don't understand, and you can quickly get yourself in trouble there because people think, oh, now you're arguing that white supremacy. No. But when you're looking at the genealogies and genetics of these people, you should expect a rainbow of people coming out of the Middle East shortly after the flood because all colors were in the same genome.
Well, here's the thing too. That, and I know I'm really stretching it out, but the Afghanistan giant.
Yeah, I've heard about that too.
He was redheaded.
Redheaded, yes. And then there's the redheaded giants out west here too. Well, and a lot of people think red hair means you're descendant of the Nephilim. Not necessarily. It just means that some angel bred with redheaded women. Okay, because they are half human. But the what I'm getting at with the genome is something you got to dig into science to find this, but it's real. You can have a white couple that'll have a black child. That does happen. It's rarely rare, but you know what's even more common is for a black couple to have a white child. This is the way it once was in all of humanity. You never knew. You know, we're never told that Jacob is what color he is, but we're told that Esau's a red man.
And there's been some twins, identical twins, that one is black.
Yes, but what it was is when we spread out across the globe and started to intermarry within that group of people that migrated out, that's where you get your races from. Early on, humanity's DNA was so dense and rich and diverse, it didn't matter. You know, you never knew what color skin your child was going to have. You could have all colors of the rainbow early on. I found an article about that years ago, and I've since lost it. I printed it. I don't know where I put it, but it went over the DNA and how that worked. And for the life of me, I can't read it. They put the DNA graphs up. It was a peer-reviewed scientific paper. And they were arguing it. And they said that the DNA testing we've done, we can tell us it goes all the way back to two common ancestors, one male, one female. And they said that tracing it backwards the way they've been able to do, that DNA that early ancestors had was much different than ours. It was what they call richer. So that's probably what's going on. But the idea that, that kind of gets into the things you and I were talking about online this week. Be careful about putting hedges up against the scriptures. And I'm not telling you not to do it, but like this revolting against Jesus having blonde hair and blue eyes, yeah, I get that. But people telling me he's got to look like, a modern day Arab. No, he didn't. He's from the house of David, and the scriptures even describe David. It doesn't tell me he had red hair, but it uses the word Adam a lot in connection with David. Well, if you understand how the Hebrew mind works, when they keep using that word Adam with him and all the different variations of Adam, it carries a connotation of red, doesn't it, brothers? Or can?
Well, it's plausible that would be one of the other reasons why they weren't so accepting of him as
it could be.
Because he didn't appear to be the common.
Right, but we know that the whole tribe of Judah tends to have this tendency because we do know that Jeremiah took the daughters back to Ireland to match up and the breach was repaired, and that's where you get all those Irish redheads. That's where that comes from. Because before then, Irishmen did not have red hair. The local Irishmen were Celts, and they had darker hair because they were actually Danites and Gadites, from Gad. There's a lot of this, and I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert at it yet. I've just started doing the research. Brother Kenyon probably, especially in his day, could have done this a lot better for us. But we've got to be careful with this, very careful with this stuff, because it can get you sideways. But what I was getting at is we put up hedges, what the rabbis would call hedges, around the teachings of Scripture, around the Torah. And you can become dogmatic with that, and it can very easily turn into not an apostasy, but a heresy. You can end up making Scripture out of your hedges. And that's what Yeshua was attacking the Pharisees for doing. You know, I don't have to give to my mom and dad. I just declare it Koban. I'll give it to the temple. Well, they turned that into a part of their religion. And Yeshua told them that what they'd done is tried to negate and get around the fifth commandment. And he condemned them for that. We've got to be careful with that. Like I've heard believers say, well, I'm going to put that under the ban. Last I heard, there was only one person who could tell me to put something under the ban. And he hasn't talked to people face to face in a long time, at least not as a group. Okay. Everywhere I've looked into the scriptures, it was Yahweh that tells his people to put something under the ban.
Most people don't know what that means.
Yeah, that means utter total destruction, Jack. Burn it. Raise it. Burn it to the ground. Kill it. Burn it. Make it nothing but ash. So there's more damage in my mind done in the visible church due to ignorance. And there's more damage done in the folks who have come out of Babylon who think that they're doing better. They're still ignorant. It's just that in the visible church, they didn't know they were ignorant. Now, these people who come out of the visible church and realize, hey, I still have to follow Torah, keep the feasts, all this stuff, they seem to exchange their ignorance in the visible church for a new type of arrogance, ignorance brought on by arrogance. We will have to study the word of Yahweh till the day we die, and we will still never understand everything that it's in. Not until he explains it to us one-on-one in the hereafter. So we've got to, in my opinion, we should keep a humility and a reverent fear for the Father and the Spirit and the Messiah and his written word, and be careful about what we add to it, because we're told several times, don't add or take away from. And we tend to do that. Now, I understand in a lot of cases we're trying to protect ourselves. I get it. We don't want to accidentally sin. I get that too. But didn't the Messiah tell you that all sins against the Son can be forgiven? And who is the Son? What is the Son? Torah made flesh. So if we, out of ignorance and innocence, mess up with the Torah, that can be forgiven. If we add to Torah, for whatever reason, no matter how sincere you might think it is, if you are going to add to Torah, you are taking Yahweh's seat in your heart and telling yourself that you are like Elohim.
There's a lot of extra Torah stuff floating around out there in the guru world of the internet.
Yes. And oh my gosh, I used to try and correct those folks. I realize now they don't want to be corrected. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. Just speak the truth once and leave them be. Those who are seeking the truth will hear the voice. And because it's not you. You're just witnessing for the Spirit. If you do it humbly and correctly, they'll hear his voice through whatever you say or do. Because we're supposed to be pointing people to him, to the Father and the Son, not to us. And if they don't want to hear you, man, just move on. I get it now. It took me years to realize it. When you try to pound sense into their head, you tear up the wheat with the chaff and the wheat with the tares and yourself. And you don't bring glory to the Father or the Son in that way either. But you also have to be careful with your own self. You have to be careful that you're not placing stumbling blocks in front of yourself. And in this world, it can be difficult. The internet has made things harder, not easier. That's another thing, folks. Be very careful out there with some of this stuff. The deepfake videos have gotten excellent. Excellent. And it's getting dang near impossible to catch them. And they're only going to get better.
And it probably might explain why it says that even the very elect shall be killed.
Yeah. We were talking about that on the show here recently. A lot of believers will tell you that passage means you can't be fooled, because he says to fool the elect as though that were possible. And they're reading that as though it's a sarcastic comment, like, the elect can't be fooled. Yes, they can. Go read 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians 2. It says they're going to send a great delusion to cause the apostasy. Do we know what an apostasy is? Who knows what an apostasy is?
Losing your way.
It's losing your way. It's not non-belief. It's you trade Yahweh for a false god or a false belief, or you turn Yahweh into a false god yourself, like Aaron was doing in front of Mount Sinai. That's an apostasy. Well, that tells us right there, 2 Thessalonians is talking to and about believers, because non-believers, people who have never come to the Lord, cannot be apostates. They're pagans. So 2 Thessalonians is talking about believers that are going to fall away. They're going to turn apostate, the great apostasy, and they're going to be deluded. Well, that right there tells us you can be deceived. You want proof? Matthew 7, 20 through 23. All those people do all those things in the name of the Messiah. And what does he tell them? I never knew you. You who practice lawlessness. They were off the path. So yeah, believers can be deceived. And the idea that they can't be is a deception.
Right.
Is a delusion itself.
Yeah.
Right. And 2 Thessalonians 2 and Matthew 7 through 20 through 23 both suggest very strongly you can also fall away to the point that you're no longer you're not going to be in the kingdom. So this idea of once saved, always saved, or pre-selection, I was chosen from the foundations of the earth. That's a deception. Go back and read that passage in Jeremiah in context. Yahweh said, yeah, I foreknew you. Who's he talking to? Jeremiah. We apply it to ourselves. Find me another passage in scripture that tells you can do that. He was talking to Jeremiah. We do this a lot. And we do it because we want the comfort. But in the process, you self-deceive. You've got to read your scriptures and read them with other believers. Private study is good, yes. That's when the Spirit's going to talk to you the most, if you're humble and you're listening. But bounce your understanding off of your brothers and sisters. There's wisdom in the counsel of more than one, or many. I think that's in the book. Okay. Make sure. Cain, what am I, my brother's keeper? Yes! You're supposed to love your brother and sister as you love yourself. Are you not your own keeper? Okay, so if I want to keep myself, don't you? And like Rick has pointed out and Ray's pointed out, the word keep actually means to guard. So am I supposed to guard my brother? Yes! Okay, and we're told in the New Testament, if you can help a wayward brother who's strayed from the path back onto the path, that's blessing for both of you. So yeah, we are our brother's keepers. So get your brother or sister to check you and help you make sure you understand correctly. They may not be right either, but if the two of you don't read the same passage and see it the same way, or both see it in a way that harmonizes and works without contradicting the word, because you can read a passage and get two different things out of it that are both legitimate. You can. But if you both read it and you get something that contradicts, one or both of you has misunderstood something. Now that's not a knock on you. It tells you time to get back to more studying and prayer. That's it. That's all. Okay. But we tend to take these things as being a knock on ourselves. If you feel somehow slighted or lessened because you've misunderstood scripture, that's a sign of pride. Okay. You should expect to be able to pick up any book in that Bible. Just pick your scriptures up, open it up, and start reading. You should be able to. I expect that there are going to be passages in whatever I'm reading I'm not going to fully or properly understand. I'm not the infinite. I'm not Yahweh. He has done. There are passages in the scriptures. Every one of the parables has 3 different meanings at a minimum. There's the surface meaning for the baby believer. There's the fairly deep one, and then ultimately they all seem to be about the two houses. When you really dig into them, they all seem to be about the 2 houses and or the kingdom. All of them. The prodigal son. That's about the house of Judah and the house of Israel. That's what that's about. When's the last time you saw a pastor teach on that? But the more you study it, the more you learn the scriptures, the quicker you realize, yes, it's a story. Yes, there are cultural messages. It's 3-layered. Okay, so it can be about the average individual. It can be about the church or whatever. It's a cultural story about just the 2 sons. But then it can be about you coming back to the Father whenever you've strayed, and ultimately it's about the 2 houses. Okay, it's 3 messages in one. That's just phenomenal because it ties in neatly with everything else in Scripture. That's just one of the biggest proofs we have that the Bible is exactly what it claims to be, the word of an all-knowing, infinite creator. I defy you to put another book like that together. Start now. I'll give you 2,500 years. Put a book like that together that has at least 66 authors and it's one consistent, coherent story. Heck, Star Wars writers can't even do that. And they're making billions of dollars off the movie and they can't keep the lines straight. How are they going to do that with something that's going to be as infinite as the Bible? No. And there's not another holy book anywhere in this world that can do it. The Quran's a hot mess, Jack. Book of Mormon, what little I've read of that got nothing to do with the Bible. I've not found, and I've read some of them, I've not found anything as consistent and coherent as the Bible. It's not internally supporting on anything. This is the only only faith that does this. It's one of the reasons I'm here. But I'm just saying, caution with some of this stuff. I know that we don't want to fall back into, we don't want to backslide back into our old ways, but you can end up putting hedges around yourself that you won't backslide, you'll fall forward into it.
Yeah.
You can become your own worst enemy.
Yeah, I've watched people on a few occasions study themselves right out of the thing.
Just make sure that if you're watching other people, make sure you watch yourself. That's the work out your own salvation. You're responsible for that. Anything else? Okay, good. I'm tired of hearing my own mouth flap. So we will call it a day. We'll do Ruth, and if you've got time, dive into Samuel, because I'm pretty sure we can put Ruth away in about 20, 30 minutes. It's a short book. And then we'll go into 1 Samuel. Do you have something?
No.
Oh, you're talking to
Sorry.
the youngin'? No? All right. Well, anything on the board?
Good.
We're good? All right.
Not really.